Hello everybody, my name is Steven and welcome back to the Storytime channel. Without wasting any time, let's get into our stories of the day. I got fired. Employer's lawyer should have done their homework. I did. This happened to me about 20 years ago while in college. I am being deliberately vague because reasons. Background. I got a job basically office sitting on weekends. I showed up at 8 a.m. and every hour I checked over things, handled the occasional phone call, and then left when the 4 p.m. person arrived. Most of the time I read, watched TV, or played games on my laptop. I probably worked no more than 10 minutes of every hour unless something went wrong. It went on like this for years. The pay was decent, holidays were double pay, and I even had opportunities to cover weekday shifts when others were sick. One day while I was covering the midday shift, my boss asked me to come into his office. He told me that the evening weekday position was going to become available that night. He offered me the position, which I accepted. I was told to punch out and return at 5 p.m. that night. The reason it went down like this should be obvious. Things went okay for a while. I showed up at 4 p.m., did the normal things, and then left at 12 a.m. when my relief arrived. It was a little more work, more call volumes, etc. Then, after 9 months, things started to go south. The daytime person developed a huge attitude problem and went from a nice person to a total Karen. She would complain about everything I did. For example, one time a system jammed up at a remote site and she called them. 5 hours later, I saw the jam was still there, so I called that site again to see if they were still working on it or if someone else was wrong because the woman on our end, who would be the one to help them, was leaving soon. They did have a problem, so I hooked them up. My reward for making sure the problem got solved and not having to bother an upper-level employee at home on a Friday, just after having left work, I got yelled at by Karen, complaining that I had apparently ignored her log entry about the issue. My defense was ignored. The boss had me highlight important things on the log to verify that I had read them. Things plodded on for a while with this new normal. I tiptoed around Karen when needed, thankful for the fact that I only had to deal with her for no more than 5 minutes. I did this stupid highlighting thing and my log entries started getting more and more detailed, even referencing Karen's calls when I had to follow up on an issue that crossed shifts. The firing. The following summer, just after I crossed year mark, I went on vacation to visit some friends out of state. When I got back, after about a week, my boss came down after everyone had left and had me describe how I did a certain task which involved certain updates. I explained to him how I did it and so forth. He then told me that I had not been doing it at all and that he was firing me. I had transposed the date of the English file for the French file, which was the previous one. The newest one had already been applied anyways, so nothing was wrong. It was just a reason to get rid of me, so I left the office. My state is an at-will employment state, which means that I can quit at any time for any reason, and my employer can terminate me at any time for any reason. The only exceptions were state and federal laws such as race, religion, etc. I thought I was screwed, so I just started applying everywhere I could. During my job search, I happened to accidentally stumble upon a link about employment law. Out of curiosity, I read it and discovered that my employer had shot themselves in the foot. In the employee handbook, there was a job security clause. What this stated was that they would never lay us off and such if our jobs were eliminated. We would simply be retained and sent to fill an opening elsewhere in the company. It sounds good, but it resulted in them cooking up reasons to fire people to get around it. But their fancy, high-priced lawyers had missed something. In my state's laws, the ones passed by the legislature, I was screwed because of the at-will. What they neglected was case law, the ones determined by courts. This site cited a case from the state Supreme Court that ruled that a job security clause waived at will on the employer's side, turning it into a just cause relationship. This means that they had to have a real reason to fire me. The revenge. With that in hand, I sought out a lawyer. After my conversation with her, I set about collecting my evidence. My former boss did not realize that I knew more about this program than he did, seeing as I ran the same software on my own computer and laptop. I experimented. The date of the file, which they tried to use against me, is baked into the version. I was able to demonstrate to my lawyer that if I applied the same update over and over, which my former employer stated would change the date every day, would, in reality, display the date of the file. I showed this by backdating my own copy by a year and using the update archive available from the vendor. Next, I showed her how the task used to be automated. A script would snag the file and process it every day on its own. A change on the vendor site broke the script. It was an easy fix, but no one bothered to do it because the guy who had wrote it retired. The fix involved deleting 3 characters on 1 line in the script. The task was also marked as only being a weekday task. In my firing, I was told how important this update was and so forth. If it was so important, why was it not done on weekdays or holidays? The vendor pushed out updates on those days too, as I showed my lawyer the one from Christmas morning. And why had the automation not been fixed? With all that in hand, she contacted them. After presenting them with the law they broke and all the evidence I had collected, they were forced to settle with me. So in the end, their fancy high-priced lawyers did not do their homework. I did. Thank you to all the wonderful librarians I have known in my life who taught me my information literacy skills. They pay dividends in this case. Edit. Obviously, the terms of settlement are confidential and, as far as I know, still in effect. It was a good portion of my salary, though. I did also get unemployment during this time as well. I never found out how the reaction went down, as the main corporate office that would have dealt with it was in another state, and I never had any contact with those people. I imagine a new handbook was issued before they cut my check, though, so I feel bad for those who remained. Karen's fate was sealed about a year later. I saw a Facebook post by a former coworker mentioning that his job with them had ended, so I asked for details. The company experienced a huge loss in revenue. As a result, Karen lost her job as the site I had worked in was closed. Of about the 50 of us that worked in that office, only 10 or so were moved to another location. Thankfully, most of the ones I liked were old enough to retire. It did not take a genius to realize that my termination was simply a layoff disguised as a firing. They really tried to do OP dirty, but OP was smart enough to read the fine print and find that loophole that shut them down. My roommate stopped paying me utilities, so this happened back in my college days. I moved in with a friend from university. She was nice enough, but she definitely had financial issues which I didn't know about before moving in together. Our apartment complex had assigned separate lease agreements because I guess they had too many situations with one person not paying, which made sense. So I was never liable for her part of the rent, but the utilities had to go in someone's name and I was the chosen one. Think electricity, cable, internet. Things got a bit rough for her and she was having trouble paying me for half of the utilities, which I was okay with and just covered it. Until one day I hear her talking to some friends on the phone about their fancy spring break trip to the Caribbean/Florida. What the freak, man? You can't pay me, but you can afford to go on vacation and drive a new car? No bueno. I locked her out of the internet. I am pretty good with computers and things, so I even kept her boyfriend's phone on the Wi-Fi, but locked her devices out of it, and just played dumb. I even got a new router. She spent hours on the phone with the internet people. She got a new phone, which I allowed to work for a few days and then shut out again. Then comes the TV. Parental supervision is great. I knew all the shows she liked to watch and blacklisted them. I barely watch TV anyway, so I didn't care. At some point, I'm talking to the apartment people and I find out she isn't paying rent either. Again, what the freak? Not cool. Even though it's not my problem, I make it my problem. We had sub-panels for electricity in each apartment, so I screw with her by randomly turning breakers on and off. She couldn't understand why her hairdryer would work one day and not the next. I'd just flick a breaker while she was showering. I convinced her that maybe her dryer was too strong for the electrical in the apartment and it was tripping it. So she bought a new fancy hairdryer. She was actually an idiot and bought one that had a higher electrical draw than the first. So I explained that to her and she bought a third one. I kept this crap up until the day we moved out. I never saw a cent from her, but man, it was worth it. ETA from other comments on the other sub, yes, I did talk to her prior to being controlling. She continually could not pay me but would come home with high-end clothes or bags, expensive food, and makeup. So you know this lady is not paying her rent or her half of the utilities, yet is buying all this stuff that obviously takes money to get. What would you do? Would you mess with her? If so, how? Or would you do something entirely different? Let me know in the comment section down below. Payback for my horrible roommate. After college, I accepted a job across the country and moved in with a vague acquaintance I had met a couple of times. It quickly became clear that we were not going to get along. He was incredibly rude and condescending, routinely making snide remarks about my intelligence since I had been in a sorority in college. He would instruct me on how to redo all of my chores in his way, always insinuating that I just wasn't as smart as he was. This led to a few heated arguments, and we ended up basically avoiding each other. My room was in the basement and he was on the second floor. Except for going in and out, I stayed in the basement to avoid him. One night I returned home and my cat was missing. He is a huge fatty and never misses a meal, so I was immediately worried. I texted the roommate to see if he had let him out by mistake. He ignored me. I looked everywhere in my room and in the common areas. No cat. I could hear that he was home, so I texted again, asking if he could please check his room or just let me know if the cat got out by mistake. Again, no response. I couldn't search the neighborhood much after dark since we were in a pretty rough area, so I stayed up all night making flyers and online posts. I called animal control and my parents, and broadly had a massive mental breakdown. I figured the most likely scenario was that he had escaped and wandered into the road. Early the next morning, Saturday, I looked all over our neighborhood. Losing hope, I returned back home. Right before I went back down to my half of the house, I heard a faint, distressed yowl. I followed the noise upstairs and realized it was coming from horrible roommate's locked bedroom. I phoned him repeatedly and waited several hours for him to come home, unlock his door, and let my poor cat out of his closet. No explanation was given, and this cat being an OG fatty and also a jerk, there was no way he silently slept all night. Simply put, there was no way this could have been an accident. At this point, we had 1 month left on the lease, and I was able to make arrangements to stay with my family for that final month. Interestingly enough, our internet service was in my name. I paid the final month in full and loaded my stuff into a U-Haul. I gleefully unplugged and returned our rented router, and OG Fatty Cat and I left town a month early. Wouldn't you know it, later that night my phone starts blowing up with texts and calls. This man is looking for his missing internet. Somehow, I couldn't be bothered to respond. I'm glad the cat is okay, and I would have done the exact same thing. They're a terrible roommate and probably a terrible person from what I'm getting from this. We don't share alcohol in this house. This story takes place a few years back, when I came home from university for Christmas holidays to visit my family. I was of legal drinking age at the time as well. To set the scene, it's just my mom and I having dinner at the beginning of our time off. She pours herself a glass of wine from an average bottle. I'm not a wine snob, but she is. I ask for a glass as well to go with dinner. She declines. Her exact words are, "We don't share alcohol in this house." Okay, not a problem. I didn't know this rule, and as I'm not a heavy drinker, I didn't see the issue with just having a glass out of her bottle. So I go on off to the liquor store to grab myself a bottle of drink over the next few days, and lo and behold, I find her favorite bottle of wine. It's Burrowing Owls. The liquor store only has a case of it and limits the number of bottles you can buy. It's a rare find and I lucked out. I buy the max, which is 2, and hid one while I bring the second inside. By now it's evening, and after dinner, my mom is in the living room finishing her wine. I open up the bottle and bring both the bottle and a glass to the living room. My mom eyes up the bottle and asks for a glass. I look her dead in the eyes and say, "Sorry mom, we don't share alcohol in this house." She offers me 2 of her bottles from mine, says I won't know the difference, but I stand firm. We don't share alcohol in this house. So I force myself to finish the bottle in front of her while she sulks. Christmas morning, after my family has opened up all our gifts, I come out with the second bottle as a gift to my mom. She shared it with me that night. If you're gonna be selfish and possessive about things, then you can't expect to be able to share stuff with other people that you otherwise shut down that wanted to try and share some simple stuff with you. But with that being said, that's all the stories we have for today. So what I want to know is, which of these stories was your personal favorite and why? Let me know which story was your personal favorite in the comments section down below. And thank you all so very much for watching and listening to the Storytime channel. If you haven't yet, please consider subscribing and don't forget to turn notifications on so you'll never miss an upcoming video from the Storytime channel. Thank you all again for watching and listening to today's stories on the Storytime channel.